Welcome back to another episode of Injustice For All MMA. My name's David. This is the show, audio, podcast thing where I talk about the biggest injustices of the night. This pertains to UFC Fight Night, Brunson versus Holland. And so far, most of this card was clean. A lot of these didn't go to decision, so that's a good thing. But for the few that did go to decision, there were a couple inconsistencies with my scorecards. Again, I think in the earlier episodes I was a bit more harsh on the judges and said a lot of those were injustices, and a lot of them were. But this is a show where I explain why my scorecard in a way, is superior to their scorecard, or just fix out a little bit of the niggles here and there. We have two injustices so far. So the last episode, I believe we didn't have any, or I believe we just had one. We've been having a few, but they're starting to come up. And the first one is Giles versus Dolidze. Now, this is my scorecard. My scorecard was 29-28, Dolidze. I had Dolidze winning a 10-9 in the first and the third. Now, here are the judges' scorecards. Eric Colon had 29-28. Brian Minner had 29-28. And Bird had 29-28, all for Giles. Now, if you look at their scorecard and my scorecard, they're pretty much the same. And the only part all four of us disagree on is the very last round. And in that very last round, Giles sat Dolidze right at the start, but Dolidze was able to reverse position a lot in the grappling exchanges that Giles had initiated and held him there for quite some time. Even though he sat him early in the round, I don't believe it was his round. It's obvious that Giles won the second round. That's not up for debate. It's obvious that Dolidze won the first. But that third round is where we get into kind of odd territory where the judges seem to value him sitting him, or him knocking him down, in that last round, but really early. A lot of this was happening where the judges were valuing certain things at different times. Again, obviously, I can't say the judges because every fight has different judges and they value certain things. But in this fight, it was just obvious that Dolidze won that last round. And that's the first injustice of the night. Okay, we have the second injustice of the night. Now, this one kind of miffed me a little bit. It miffed me. It caught me a little bit because this one, it makes no sense at all, actually. This one is Reneau versus Chiasson. I'll read you the judges' scorecard. Mike Bell had it 29-28. Saul D'Amato had it 29-28. And Rick Winter had it 29-28. All for V Chiasson. Now, in my head, I was thinking at the least, this should be a split decision for Chiasson. At the least. Now, my scorecard had it 29-28 for Reneau. Now, all the scorecards are pretty identical in that Reneau wins the first round and Chiasson wins the second round. Now, in the third is where we get into who values what at what time, and this is what really stuck me. In that third round, in the third round, it was basically the first round where Chiasson is pushing Reneau, right? She's more active, and she's pushing the pace. But Reneau is getting her. Reneau is catching her. Her striking is much better, and she's hitting the target more often than Chiasson is. But right when Reneau had Chiasson in the clinch, there was a takedown. Right, so Chiasson had taken Reneau down right at the very end. So in the first half of that third round, Reneau is catching Chiasson, even though Chiasson is more active, right? But in the very waning seconds, or last minute really, Chiasson gets a takedown. Now, in that takedown, she's not very active. It's very minimal ground and pound until about 11 seconds left on the clock. And Reneau is much more active than Chiasson is. So, in that instance, it's one of these cases where, are we valuing the takedown, or are we valuing the fact that she had like a flurry at 11 seconds left? Because when they were on the feet, Reneau was hitting her. Reneau was catching her. And for that middle part, Reneau had her in the clinch. I think that Reneau wins this round just based off of the clinch work, the striking at the first half of that third round, and at the very end doesn't even matter because she takes her down, but she's not active when she takes her down. And that's the second injustice of the night. Now we go to our honorable mentions. Now the honorable mentions are individual rounds scored. Right, I'm really nitpicky on, judges either inflating the scorecard or not really underinflating, but inflating the scorecards, or just getting a round wrong, even if the rightful fighter won. So we'll go back. The first honorable mention is Santos versus Dawson. Now, in this fight, I'll read the scorecards. Right. So, before the fight ended in a TKO or in a KO really for Dawson, there was a weird feeling that Santos had used that third round to kind of cruise after Dawson had taken him down. And if you look at the scorecards, he was on his way to a split decision victory. Dawson was, but one of the judges, Dave Hagen, had given Santos the very first round. Now, in that very first round, I don't see how at all you could make a case for Santos, right? It was very clinch heavy. It reminded me of, and this is a loose reminder, but it reminded me of Holly Holm versus Raquel Pennington, where the entire match is just a clinch fest. But if the whole match is a clinch fest, whoever is in the dominant clinch position is obviously going to win the round. So Dawson is trying to get a takedown all night, really, and he's in control in the clinch multiple times. Now, Dawson gets a takedown, but it doesn't get counted as a takedown, but he lifts him up in the air and he throws him down. It doesn't get counted as a takedown, but it's a big action that you could argue is basically a takedown. Santos does take him down, but in the more traditional sense. But if you count both of them as takedowns, which I believe is what the other two judges did, Conejo and Weeks. It's most of that round is Dawson clinching Santos. There is no way in the world that the majority of the round is being clinched, and then Santos gets one takedown, and that's his round. It makes zero sense. It makes no sense at all. That same judge, Dave Hagen, he does give Dawson the second. So, obviously, I take that back. It wasn't going to be a split decision loss, but a split decision win for Dawson. But it was just an incorrect round scored by Dave Hagen to give Santos the very first round. Another honorable mention is Buys versus Conejo. Buys versus Conejo. My scorecard was 29-28 Conejo, obviously. And then Rick Winter had a 29-28. Saul D'Amato had 29-28. And then we get into the problem that is hurting a lot of these fighters. Not really hurting because Buys lost the fight, but inflated scorecards where I believe either judges just aren't watching, and this judge was Mike Bell, a nice judge, but I'm sorry, it wasn't Mike Bell. This was this is Brian Minner. Excuse me. This was Brian Minner. He had 29. Yeah, he had 29-27. Mike Bell had 29-28, and Conejo had 29-28, with Brian Minner scoring 10-8 in the first. Now, it's one of those things where your eyes can kind of deceive you, really, where Conejo gets her in that position she continued to get the entire night, where she has her like in a scarf hold and is throwing punches, right? And these punches aren't finishing Buys at all. To the point where she's moving the entire time. I mean, she's moving, and she's attempting subs, right? So not only are those rabbit punches not hurting her, but she's attempting to get out to the point where she attempts a couple subs from that position. Obviously, they're not successful, but at the very last bit of that round, she does take Conejo's back. Now, on a scorecard, that's a 10-9. She was not dominated. She's being held in a vulnerable position, where not only could she have been finished, but she's moving, trying to get out, and attempting subs on the person who's holding her. And at the very end of the round, then gets her back. If she was in like a crucifix for the entire round, which I doubt is possible, because if someone is in a crucifix for the entire round, the chances of them getting out of that and exiting the round into the next round is so unlikely with ground and pound. But if she was in a crucifix and just getting pummeled in that position, I could see a 10-8. I could definitely see a 10-8. But she's not in a crucifix. She's in a scarf hold, and she's mobile, and she's moving, and she's attempting subs. And at the very end of the round, now granted it's the last second of the round, but the very last second of the round, she takes her back. That's a 10-8. This is another example. I'm sorry, that's a 10-9. This is another example of a inflated scorecard. Just a random 10-8 just thrown out of nowhere. So that's another honorable mention. And then the last fight of the night, Brunson versus Holland. This is a last honorable mention. My scorecard is 49-46 Brunson. And then Mike Bell had it 49-45. Saul D'Amato had it 49-46. And Conejo had it 49-46. Now, here's where I just get confused, because I don't know whether they're just telling the judges a random judge to just, hey, you have to enforce the 10-8. You have to force the 10-8. Because I feel like a lot of these just kind of alternate who just gives out 10-8s. But in the very first round, Holland slips. Yes. We understand that Holland slips. And Brunson just gets on top of him. And it remains like that for about the rest of the round. But Brunson's ground and pound not only is not hitting him, but Holland is more active on the bottom at that point. And just because he rode him for 5 minutes doesn't mean it's a 10-8. But then again, one judge saw it that way. It's, I feel like, some judges will value, a takedown maybe too much. When someone gets taken down but does nothing. Now, granted, Brunson did something. He did ground and pound, but his ground and pound wasn't to the I mean, Kevin Hall was still moving. He was still on the bottom, and he was still moving, and he was still, attacking from the bottom. In no way does that mean you got dominated. I mean, he got dominated overall throughout the fight. But in this individual round, there's no way. Well, that's the last of it. This has been another episode of Injustice For All MMA. I don't know how long I'm going to continue doing these, but I do have fun scoring these cards. There are just sometimes, again, the reason why I did these is because I felt as though this is, no one really talks about weird, wonky scorecards, or probably fights that no one cares about. I feel like if Holland and Brunson were somewhat competitive and a scorecard was messed up, there'd be a talk about it. But, I just feel like, Dolidze versus Giles, Chiasson versus Reneau, there are fights like that where I feel as though the judges got it wrong. And if I just keep scoring these cards, hopefully I made a sound case. Obviously, I'm just going by round, not the entire fight, because my scorecard also reflects the same as the judge's scorecard. Just there are certain rounds that we just disagree on, which eventually leads to a different outcome. Thank you for listening, and God bless.